You know what? I'm gonna play Call of Duty 1, 2, and 3.
Why is that?
Well, it's the best selling franchise of all time. I want to know how it started. What are its foundations?
Sure you want to do this?
Yeah, of course I want to do this. Just because you put on a ranger hat doesn't make you a drill sergeant. How yin's doing? When you duty from and I call for the you? Call of Duty. Call of Duty was made in 2003 by Infinity Ward and starts with basic training. Poor guy. He probably got drafted. Hopefully that'll never happen to me. Damn it. The game takes place during World War II and starts with D-Day. I parachute in, take over a town, and save British officers.
Oh god.
I then play as them.
I'm so sorry, soldier!
As the British, I take over a bridge, sabotage a dam, fire anti-air guns, and sabotage a German ship. Now as the Soviets, yeah, the game keeps jumping from perspective to perspective. Kinda wish it didn't do that as it's harder to follow the story, if there was one. But I storm Stalingrad and just don't get a weapon. But I keep pushing and pushing through sewers, apartment buildings, warehouses, until I get to ride a tank. Beautiful. I get to the final missions of the game. The Americans stop German tanks, the British destroy rockets, and the Soviets retake Reichstag building, thus ending the war, and that's the end of the game. That sure was war! Call of Duty has some great gameplay, but no story nor memorable characters. The whole game is just going from objective to objective until you defeat the enemy. Well what? I don't have time to bond with my fellow soldiers? The objectives also get repetitive. It's just defending a point or blowing up something. There aren't any stealth parts or anything, just explosives. Something the game tried to replicate from World War II is trying to give you tinnitus. Wow. That hurt. There is multiplayer. Granted, nobody plays it, but it exists. The music wasn't even memorable. This is just an average game. Fun gameplay. Nice to see the war in different points of views, but with no real story or characters, it's just a generic game. But thankfully, the war is over.
Back to World War II, soldier!
But the war ended! The war ended! Call of Duty 2, made by Infinity Ward, again, starts with World War II. Again. It does the same thing as the last game where there are 3 different campaigns based on the Allied forces. However, they don't jump around with perspectives. You can play every Soviet mission or American mission in a row without interruption. Starting with the Soviets, this time defending Moscow and then taking back Stalingrad. But at least it's not entirely just going around killing enemies from one point to another like it was in the last game. For example, I'm fixing telephone wires and going around and killing enemies from one point to another. This makes the game better. I eventually recapture and defend the city hall in Stalingrad and move on to the British campaign. The first couple of missions take place in Africa, which is really nice to see. I'm really tired of these World War II games where every battle takes place in Europe.
You know most battles took place in Europe, right?
Proof?
The fucking war?
I am led by Captain Price as we destroy German supply stations and kick the Germans out of Egypt. Then they come back.
So I kicked them out harder.
The British campaign ends with the Battle of Caen as I move on to the best campaign. The American campaign starts with D-Day at the assault of Puente du Hoc, where I destroy German artillery and stop their counterattack, capture Bergstein and survive the counterattack, and then I capture Hill 400's bunker and survive their counterattack. They sure do love to try and take back what was theirs. Actually, it's war. That makes a lot of sense. I end with one more assault against the Germans, and that's the end of the game. That was a little bit better. We're getting somewhere. It was very similar to Call of Duty 1. They tried to make a less linear game compared to the last, whereas Call of Duty 1 was linear like going down a hallway. Call of Duty 2 was linear like going down a wide hallway. Sure, you can go left or right, but ultimately, you're going forward. The battles do feel a lot bigger in this game. The enemies and your allies feel more alive and actually give you useful callouts like where an enemy is. A new mechanic they added to this game is regenerative health. If you're about to die, just get behind cover and in a few seconds you'll be good. You don't need a med pack or anything. This does make the game easier, but it's nice to not have to look for a med pack anymore. I feel like they could have made it bigger, but they were unaware of how powerful the Xbox 360 could be. There's still not much of a story, as it's just actual battles that happened in World War II and no memorable characters except for Captain Price. And I only know him because he was in the last game. The multiplayer is something. The music wasn't noticeable and it's just like Call of Duty 1, so why is this game better? It really is because of the bigger maps, better AI, everything they did to make an action game have more action from the last. Each battle felt more impactful, and that's what makes this game better. But the war is finally over.
You're not gonna believe this.
How can Infinity Ward... That's not how you spell Infinity Ward. Yeah, apparently one game every 2 years was not fast enough for Activision, so they hired a new company, Treyarch. I don't know, let's just see what they can do. The first big difference is that Treyarch added cutscenes and they look beautiful and actually string the story along. The last two Call of Duty games were just actual battles with no story, but now you have actual battles and a story. I start doing what I do best and start killing Germans as I enter the capital of St. Lo. Midway through, tension rises in my division and Sergeant Frank just threatens to kill our radio operator Guzzo. They eventually calm down, but it's nice to see some drama for the first time in a Call of Duty game. After more dead Germans, I capture St. Lo and I go back to being British. Which is getting horrendous at this point. How could this get any worse? I skydive in and join the French resistance. It got worse. Yeah, Call of Duty 3 does what Call of Duty 1 did and jump from army to army perspective instead of letting you experience all of one particular army story at a time. I meet Pierre and Isabelle and it turns out they also hate the Germans. They introduce driving and it's okay. Nothing special, it's just a Jeep. Apparently through all of the shooting and driving, we saved Marcel, who's supposed to help us, but Corporal Duncan does not trust him. Or like the French in general. Back to the Americans, I fight through Maya to stop a bridge from exploding, but Sergeant Frank is killed in the process. I get to play as a new army now, the Canadians, which are basically the British light. The Canadians take a warehouse and stop the Germans from taking it back. I get a glimpse of another new army, the Polish, as they talk down about the British.
That we rely on the British.
Yeah, I like these guys. The British destroyed the German fuel facility, but Major Ingram is supposedly killed. The Polish capture Hill 262, and newly promoted Sergeant Dixon leads the Americans to find some lost engineers. Turns out they were mostly dead, so I retook the depot. The Canadians destroyed anti-tank weapons to help the Polish, and my lieutenant tries to tell me something, but I just can't hear him.
Nicely done.
Corporal Duncan believes that Major Ingram is still alive, and it turns out he is. So we save him and other captured French marquis, but Isabelle is killed in a gunfight. Oh no! Anyways, on the Canadian front, tension is rising between Lieutenant Jean and Private Baron, as Baron is now transferred against his will to the Polish army to replace their radio operator. I take over St. Lambert-sur-Dives and find an ammo stockpile, so I try to blow it up, but the fuse was defective, so Sergeant Callard sacrifices himself to destroy the ammo. The Polish defend Hill 262, now with Private Baron from the Canadian Army, who they just killed off for some reason. The hill gets difficult to defend against the advancing Germans, but finally the Canadians show up. In the final mission, the Americans defend Chamois, but it is difficult. So Guzzo attempts to call in air support and gets wounded. Sergeant Dixon and I save him, but Dixon gets shot and killed. We keep defending until support finally arrives, ending the war, and that's the end of the game. Surprisingly, that was kind of a downgrade. Call of Duty 3 did fix one issue that I had with the two other games, in which they didn't have a story. The issue with this game is that while the story is there, it felt as though the gameplay was hurt because they focused so much on the story. It was a decent story. It was still armies going from battle to battle, but at least you had banter and drama to make the soldiers feel more like people. The gameplay did suffer though. I just felt like the AI wasn't as good in this game, and my teammates just kept getting in my way. They did try to make the combat up close by adding quick time events, but I don't think it gave off the effect they wanted. The maps in Call of Duty 2 were made to feel more open so you can attack at any angle, and this game just feels more linear. Sure, they may give you a branching path, but they don't have any effect. It's just, oh, do you want to shoot enemies on the left side of the building? Or the right? They kept killing off allies towards the end of the campaign, and I don't feel bad about their death because the story just kept jumping around perspectives that I didn't have time to bond with most of them. Multiplayer sure does exist. The music was spectacular this time. I don't know if it's because they seem to have more brass instruments or the fact that they made the music louder than the gunshots, but the music added so much to every battle. Call of Duty 3 did not live up to Call of Duty 2. The story was good, but the gameplay wasn't there. Maybe Treyarch can't make a Call of Duty like Infinity Ward can. No! I'm done with you! World War II is over!
I'll be back.